What if the thing you're trying to escape isn't what's truly haunting you? Why do you return to the same habit even when it destroys you? Why does your willpower vanish the moment silence arrives? Why do you feel emptier after satisfaction, not before? Why do you fear being alone with yourself more than you fear death? This is not a talk about recovery. This is a descent into the unconscious root of addiction. We will ask, what is your psyche crying out for beneath the craving? What ancient wound are you trying to numb with pleasure? What unlived life are you burying beneath distraction? What if your addiction is not a defect, but a message from the self? What if it has come to save you, not destroy you? This is not motivation, it is confrontation. Stay with me, because until you understand what your addiction is really saying, you will keep escaping the wrong thing. Introduction. The flame in the dark. A man sits in a darkened room. Before him, a flickering flame. Each time it dims, he lunges towards something. A bottle, a device, a lover, a task. Something to keep the flame alive. But this fire does not reside in any object. It is within. It is the self, dimmed by fear, covered in layers of avoidance and longing. What he reaches for is not a solution, but a symptom. The psyche does not merely break. It speaks symbolically, forcefully, and often in the language of compulsion. What the conscious mind calls addiction is, from the standpoint of depth psychology, a tragic misinterpretation of a symbolic process. It is the ego's frantic attempt to avoid feeling something that the soul insists must be felt. We must not begin by condemning the addict, nor by trying to cure him with surface advice. We must listen to what the symptom is saying, not what the mouth says, but what the hands do. Why do we again and again reach for what wounds us? Not simply substances, but habits, identities, lovers, screens. Why do we become addicted not only to narcotics, but to validation, success, suffering? Addiction is not the enemy, it is the messenger. The ego interprets it as weakness, but the soul speaks in symbols, and the symbol of addiction is this: something vital is missing, something forgotten longs to return. The compulsive gesture is the outer drama of an inner exile. You cannot treat a symbol as a machine. It will rebel. To treat addiction as a malfunction is to miss its archetypal depth. It is a ritual of unconsciousness, a ceremony performed daily, sometimes hourly, a liturgy of avoidance offered to a false god, but even this false god hides a sacred longing. When one has lost connection to the self, something must fill the emptiness. The ego, unable to create meaning from within, seeks ecstasy without. What it consumes is not the thing. It is the image of wholeness, the counterfeit of sacred union. It reaches for the drink, but it wants the divine. It reaches for the lover, but it wants the soul. Addiction is not only escape, it is protest. It is the psyche's howl against a life stripped of mystery. It is the cry of the shadow, begging not to be exiled. For every act of self-destruction contains an image of rebirth, distorted but present. The syringe is a cross, the casino a temple, the bottle a chalice. All false sacraments of a disoriented God image. The one who is addicted is not weak. He is overpowered by a force he cannot name. This is not metaphor, it is fact. The unconscious, when repressed, gains autonomy. What is not made conscious appears as fate. And so the addict repeats, not because he has no will, but because his will is possessed by a deeper archetypal necessity. To understand addiction, we must enter the domain of the symbolic. We must regard each compulsion as a dream. What is it asking? What image does it imitate? What hunger does it conceal? This is not the language of diagnosis, but of reverence. We are not dissecting behavior. We are listening to a soul's mythology. The question is not merely, how do I stop? But what am I avoiding? For in every addiction, there lies a central avoidance, an encounter with a psychic truth the ego is not yet ready to bear. Thus, addiction is a defense, but it is also a clue. It shows us where the wound is deepest. Why do we return to the same wounds with such urgency? Because the wound is also the place of potential. In alchemy, one must first experience nigredo, the blackening, the chaos, before any gold can appear. Addiction is the blackening, but only when entered consciously does it become transformation. The addicted man or woman is not chasing pleasure. They are reenacting a ritual that binds them to the unconscious. And in that repetition, we must ask, what symbol is being served? What dream is being mimicked? For even the act of destruction, when viewed symbolically, reveals a desire for renewal. There is no such thing as meaningless compulsion. The psyche does not act at random. Each behavior, no matter how destructive, is a symbol. The addict is not simply enslaved, he is misdirected. His inner fire burns for truth, but he feeds it with illusion, and yet the flame flickers still. To ask, what is addiction, is to ask, what part of the self have I buried? What grief lies ungrieved? What passion unlived? What instinct, once sacred, now deemed sinful, has been cast into shadow and returns now with fangs? Every addiction is a psychic shortcut, a bypass of suffering that refuses to become conscious. But suffering, when endured fully, opens the door to integration. To feel what was once forbidden, to grieve, to rage, to desire authentically, is the beginning of healing. The paradox is this: the very thing we avoid through addiction is what we must feel to be free. The drink masks sorrow. The screen masks loneliness. The fix masks divine longing. To reverse the symbol, we must make conscious what has been enacted blindly. This is not a video about sobriety. It is not a sermon about willpower. It is a descent into the symbolic life of addiction. For it is not what you do that reveals your truth, but what you repeat. And if what you repeat leads to pain, then it is pain that must be understood. Addiction is the ego's protest against its own meaninglessness. It is the shadow's cry to be known. And if we listen, not just with ears, but with the heart, we will hear in that cry not ruin, but yearning. The yearning to return to the self, to the sacred center, to what was lost, buried, and betrayed. The alcoholic is not just thirsty, he is soul thirsty. The gambler is not seeking luck, he is risking annihilation in order to feel alive. The lover of chaos does not want destruction, he wants the death of the false. Every compulsion is a symbol in disguise, and every symbol, once made conscious, becomes a bridge. The bottle is not the enemy, it is the gateway to the wound. And the wound is the gateway to the soul. What is buried in your addiction is not shame. It is a sacred instinct that has been distorted. You do not need to destroy the desire. You must bring it into alignment with meaning. The libido does not disappear. It must be reoriented. It must serve the self. To walk the path of transformation is to walk into the flame, not to extinguish it, but to remember that it was never outside you. What you reach for is not your salvation. It is your shadow. And behind that shadow waits the self. This journey is not one of techniques. It is one of truth. What have you lost? What do you fear to feel? What must die in you? Not so you can escape, but so you can begin. The man in the room staring at the flickering flame, he is all of us. And his moment of reckoning comes when he sees the flame is not outside. It is not the drink, the lover, the light on the screen. It is the soul waiting to be remembered. Let us now begin. Part 1. The symbolic nature of addiction. What we call addiction is not merely a pathology of behavior. It is a symbol enacted through the body, a rite repeated, a ritual born not of religion, but of compulsion, though it mimics religion in structure, intensity, and sacrifice. And what is sacrificed? The self, the soul, the buried voice crying out in repetition. Addiction is not chosen, it is inherited, not from parents, but from the psyche's neglected truths. Every ritual of addiction is the ego's liturgy of refusal, its refusal to descend, to feel, to surrender. And so it repeats again and again the same gesture: reach, consume, collapse. The substance may differ, but the rhythm is sacred in its predictability. When one is trapped in this cycle, the conscious mind pleads, why can't I stop? But the psyche is not interested in control. It is interested in wholeness. And when a vital part of the soul has been exiled, be it grief, sexuality, rage, longing, it returns through the back door of addiction. This is the hidden nature of compulsion. It is a symbolic act. It is the soul's disguised cry for integration. If we approach it merely as illness, we blind ourselves to its purpose. But if we approach it as symbol, we begin to hear what the addiction is saying beneath its scream. There is a psychic law: what we refuse to suffer consciously, we will suffer unconsciously. Repetition compulsion, as I observed, is not just the ego's error, it is a deeper necessity. The unconscious repeats not to torture, but to teach. Until the lesson is heard, the symptom continues. Consider the woman addicted to productivity. To the eye, she is admirable, organized, accomplished, disciplined, but beneath this surface lies terror, not of failure, but of silence, stillness, emptiness. the place where the forgotten voice of the soul might finally be heard. Her addiction is not to achievement, but to avoidance. She cannot stop working because to stop would mean to feel, and what waits to be felt is ancient, a sorrow unwept, a desire unlived, a self denied. Her calendar is not her salvation, it is her prison. Her addiction is a daily ritual, a substitute for initiation. It imitates transformation, but delivers only trance. This is the tragedy. Addiction looks like action, but it is paralysis. It promises freedom, but ensures enslavement. And yet it persists, because the psyche has found no other language to say what must be said. The ritual continues until the symbol is seen for what it is, a stand-in for truth. All addiction is symbolic ceremony. The drink is the chalice, the drug is the incense, the action is the prayer, and yet the God being served is false. Not because the longing is false, but because the path has been severed from meaning. What the addict truly worships is the self, but in distortion. A man addicted to pornography is not seeking mere pleasure. He is seeking union, intimacy, the eros of connection. But he has confused image with essence. His desire is real, but it has been captured by shadow. And now the ritual of consumption replaces the actual encounter with the other. The addict performs the rite. He reaches for the symbol, but it gives no blessing, only momentary numbness. The more he seeks, the more the soul withdraws. This is the wound repeating itself. The symptom does not want to be indulged. It wants to be interpreted. We cannot speak of addiction without invoking the archetype of Tantalus, the Greek king condemned to reach forever for fruit he cannot grasp and water that retreats when he bends to drink. Tantalus is not only a myth, he is the image of psychic starvation in the midst of abundance. He is the addict. Tantalus is not punished for desire, but for misdirected desire. The gods punish him for betrayal of the sacred. This is what addiction does. It betrays the sacred within. It replaces the inner altar with outer objects. And like Tantalus, we suffer, not because we reach, but because we reach wrongly. The ego believes it must do something to escape the cycle. But the deeper work is not to act, it is to see. Addiction ends not with force, but with meaning. The cycle breaks not when the behavior stops, but when the image underneath the behavior is brought to consciousness. In the addicted state, the soul is rehearsing its death and rebirth, but the ritual is unconscious. There is no transformation, only repetition. In the ancient world, rituals were gateways. They were symbolic enactments of inner mysteries. Addiction is a ritual without revelation. What has been forgotten is that the psyche needs symbolic acts to move forward. The problem is not the presence of ritual, but its distortion. In the addicted state, the ritual has lost its center. It no longer leads inward, it loops. It circles around the void, never daring to descend. We must ask, what is the addict avoiding? Not pain, but feeling. Not suffering, but meaning. For true suffering is not pain, it is the absence of meaning in pain. And the addict has not yet descended far enough to find meaning in the wound, so he returns again and again. The ego says, I am broken. The psyche replies, no, you are split, divided, disconnected. The healing of addiction is not about fixing what is wrong. It is about reuniting what has been separated, the inner child, the rejected shadow, the abandoned God image. All must return. To see addiction symbolically is to honor its message without condoning its cost. It is to bow before the ritual, not to worship it, but to understand it. Every repetition is a prayer, every prayer a symbol, and every symbol a map to the soul. In analysis, we do not ask, how many drinks did you have? We ask, what does the drink mean to you? What happens inside you just before you reach for it? These questions reveal the psyche's script, the hidden myth playing itself out in daily gestures. Often, the addict is the only one who still believes in transformation. He simply seeks it through a distorted path. His craving is not only for relief, but for rebirth. His tragedy is that he mistakes the bottle for the baptism. True change begins when we recognize the right beneath the compulsion, when we stop moralizing and begin mythologizing. The addict is not just ill, he is initiated, though he does not know it. He is walking the threshold of transformation, but he must descend consciously. And so we come to the root. Addiction is not the enemy, it is the symbol. The enemy is unconsciousness, the refusal to feel, the repression of the soul's grief, longing, and rage. Addiction is not about excess, it is about exile. The exiled part of the self returns in disguise. To confront addiction symbolically is to accept the invitation to individuation, to cease escaping and begin exploring, to follow the symptom down to its origin, to see the drink, the pattern, the screen, not as defect, but as dream. The ego says, this is killing me. The self says, yes, because something false in you must die. And so the work begins, not in control, but in contact, not in abstinence alone, but in meaning. When the symbol is seen, the ritual can evolve, and what was once repetition becomes revelation. Let us continue. Let us now enter the shadow. Part 2, the shadow behind the craving. Every act of addiction is a mask, and every mask conceals a face not yet permitted to be seen. Beneath the craving lies the shadow, that unlived portion of the soul which the ego has declared unacceptable. But what is refused does not disappear. It gathers power in the depths. It waits. The shadow is not a moral judgment. It is a psychic fact. It is everything I would rather not be, and yet am. It is the grief I hide behind performance, the rage I deny behind civility, the longing I condemn behind religion. The shadow is not evil. It is exiled vitality. Addiction is the disguised return of that vitality. It is energy, distorted, passion turned compulsive, desire masked as dependency. The alcoholic does not crave alcohol. He craves permission to feel rage, grief, lust, despair. The drink is only the outer vessel. The contents are hidden within. Projection is the first defense. What I cannot bear to see in myself, I place onto others or objects. But displacement is the deeper current. The longing for wholeness becomes a craving for substances. The yearning for power becomes a need to gamble. The buried self emerges through detour. There was once a man, quiet and unassuming, who found himself lost in the grip of gambling. To others, he was irrational, compulsive, self-destructive, but in analysis, his dreams told another story. Night after night, he found himself walking a labyrinth, guided by a masked trickster who spoke in riddles and laughter. The labyrinth was his psyche, the trickster his shadow. The mask was not to deceive, it was to protect. For what the trickster revealed was not chaos, but possibility. The man, raised in strict tradition, had never risked being himself. His gambling was not about money, it was a secret rebellion, a longing to feel alive outside the inherited cage. This is the truth. The shadow contains unlived life, and addiction is one of its disguises. We do not become addicted to that which we hate, we become addicted to that which carries our forgotten power. It is a dark mirror. In it, we see our disowned God. The more rigid the persona, the mask we wear in the world, the more violent the return of the shadow. The man who prides himself on purity will fall to lust. The woman who performs virtue may become obsessed with control. It is not hypocrisy, it is imbalance. The ego cannot carry the burden of the whole psyche. When it tries, it splits, and the split part becomes autonomous. It acts out, it seduces, it repeats. This is the addiction. Not a flaw in character, but a sign that the psyche is demanding reunion. Let us consider the myth of the Minotaur, a monstrous being, half man, half bull, hidden in the labyrinth beneath the palace. He devours those sent to appease him, but he was not born evil. He was born of shadow, secrecy, and denial. He is the symbol of unacknowledged instinct. The addict becomes the sacrificer and the sacrificed. He feeds the Minotaur within him, but the hero, Theseus, must descend. He must enter the maze, not to destroy the beast, but to confront it. Not all that is wild is wicked. The Minotaur does not need death, he needs recognition. Addiction is the labyrinth, the craving, the Minotaur. But the thread that guides us out is awareness. Until we descend willingly, we remain trapped. Until we confront what we fear in ourselves, it continues to rule us from below. I have said, the shadow is not evil, it is simply unloved. When it is denied, it becomes grotesque. When it is embraced, it becomes power. The alcoholic, once sober, often discovers a fierce sensitivity. The compulsive seducer, once conscious, becomes capable of true intimacy. The gambler, once integrated, finds a calling in risk, in vision, in creation. But this cannot happen through repression. The ego must engage in dialogue. It must ask, what do you want from me? What truth have I refused to live? For the addiction is not arbitrary, it is precise. The form of the craving reveals the form of the buried soul. The woman who cuts herself is not simply in pain. She is trying to feel, to be real, to know the body she has been taught to hate. Her shadow is not darkness, it is embodiment. Her addiction is a cry for incarnation. To integrate the shadow, one must suffer it, not be devoured by it, but sit with it, speak to it, draw it, dream it. The moment we stop fighting the craving and begin interpreting it, something shifts. It becomes less demonic, more human. It becomes a wounded child, or a feral animal, or a forgotten god. In dreams, the shadow appears often as a figure of the same sex, dark, seductive, violent, or mocking. It may chase us, insult us, or offer us gifts. But the shadow is not there to harm, it is there to awaken. The dream does not lie, it shows us what the waking ego refuses to see. The shadow behind addiction may not be what we expect. It may be tenderness, or grief, or erotic innocence, but it has been exiled, and it returns as excess, as hunger without name. Until it is named, it will not cease. There is no healing without shadow, and there is no addiction without repression. We must trace the compulsion back, not to childhood alone, but to the forgotten myth. The personal trauma, yes, but also the archetypal wound, the fall, the exile, the betrayal of the inner king. We are not merely personal beings, we are archetypal. The addict is not just a man or woman in pain. He is a figure in an ancient drama, and the shadow is his lost twin, his brother, his buried soul. When he turns toward it, the craving begins to shift. True freedom does not come from will, it comes from wholeness. The shadow must be welcomed to the fire, not as master, but as part of the self. Then the need for escape lessens. Then the flame becomes steady. Addiction is the soul's way of saying, there is more in you than you allow. And the shadow is its voice, not to terrify, but to restore. Every bottle is a door, every compulsion, a message, every fall, a chance to rise, not in purity, but in truth. To meet the shadow behind the craving is to begin the return. The ego need not die, it must bow. Then the shadow dances and the craving quiets. And so we prepare to go deeper still. Part 3, Archetypes of Hunger, what the psyche is starving for. Addiction is not pleasure, it is not indulgence, it is starvation, a starvation of the soul, not of the body. The addict does not seek intoxication, but nourishment, not oblivion, but contact, not numbness, but fullness. The tragedy is this: what he hungers for cannot be consumed. The psyche does not crave substances, it craves symbols. It hungers not for the object, but for what the object once represented. Meaning, connection, presence, wholeness. The addict misremembers the source of fulfillment. He turns outward again and again, seeking what can only be encountered within. In ancient Buddhist lore, there are spirits known as hungry ghosts. They wander with enormous bellies and pinhole mouths. No matter how much they consume, they are never satisfied. This is not merely folklore, it is an image of the modern soul, bloated with stimulation, yet starving for essence. We are a civilization of hungry ghosts, and our addictions are not perversions, they are symptoms of absence, of spiritual famine. We no longer know the rituals that nourish, so we invent compulsions to replace them. We no longer speak to the gods, so we whisper to the screen, the needle, the thrill. A young man came into analysis. He could not stop watching pornography. Hours passed in a trance. He was ashamed not only of the act, but of its futility. It did not satisfy. It did not even arouse. It numbed. It dulled. But it also held him captive. We spoke of eros, not as lust, but as relatedness, as psychic energy, as the connective fire between self and other, soul and world. What emerged was not a craving for sex, but a starvation for intimacy, for presence, for the erotic as a sacred current, not as transaction. In his dreams, women would appear but never speak. They turned away. They dissolved. He wept in sleep, not from desire, but from abandonment. Beneath his addiction was grief, grief for the absence of love, touch, and vulnerability. His hunger was not for images, it was for contact with the living soul of another. I have taught that libido is not merely sexual, it is the totality of psychic energy. Wherever it flows, life quickens. When it is blocked, symptoms arise. Addiction is blocked libido, the vital stream diverted into fixation. Obsession is not passion, it is passion trapped in repetition. The addict is not wrong to hunger. He is wrong only in where he seeks to feed. What he truly craves is not stimulation, it is encounter with beauty, with depth, with the self. But the road has been forgotten, the temple buried, the door hidden behind shame and trauma. In the myth of Demeter and Persephone, we see this starvation. Persephone is abducted into the underworld. Demeter, the mother goddess, wanders the earth in mourning. The land grows barren, nothing blooms, the world starves. This is not just myth, it is psyche. When the sacred daughter is lost, the soul becomes infertile. Addiction is Demeter's mourning unacknowledged. It is the barren land covered in artificial light. It is the soul's search for the sacred that has been stolen. What the addict seeks is not excitement, it is reunion with that lost part of the self, the inner child, the divine feminine, the feeling function. He eats but is not fed. He touches but does not connect. He consumes but is never full, because what he seeks is not the thing but the meaning. And the meaning cannot be bought, consumed, or downloaded. It must be lived. This is the ache behind all compulsive behavior, to feel real, to know that one exists, that one is seen, that one is loved not for performance, not for control, but for presence. But this experience, if not known in early life, becomes sought through distorted repetition. The psyche must mourn what it never received. Until then it will seek it through fantasy. This is not regression, it is necessary. One must grieve the lost father, the absent mother, the vanished God. One must say, I was not fed, and in that grief something opens. The true hunger is revealed. Addiction is also a response to a loss of ritual. In traditional cultures, initiation marked the soul's transition from childhood to adulthood. There was a symbolic death, followed by symbolic rebirth. But in modernity, initiation is replaced by consumption. The youth is not transformed, he is marketed to. And so he initiates himself through danger, through addiction, through compulsion, not consciously, but archetypally. The gambling table becomes the sacred arena. The pill becomes the initiatory poison. The sexual encounter becomes a rite, but without elders, without meaning, the rite becomes a trap. The ego cannot sustain this journey alone. It must turn inward, not toward self-improvement, but toward symbol. What is the addiction saying? What myth is being enacted? What part of the soul is playing the role of the hunger? Each form of addiction hides a different archetype. The alcoholic may carry Dionysus, the god of ecstasy and dissolution. The compulsive shopper may carry Aphrodite, longing for beauty and adoration. The adrenaline addict may carry Ares, the god of battle, rage, and risk. But without consciousness, these gods become tyrants. To break the spell of addiction, one must name the god, not to destroy it, but to honor it in its rightful form. Then the ritual can evolve. The drunkard may become the mystic, the gambler, the entrepreneur, the seducer, the lover. But the shift is not behavioral, it is symbolic. I have seen former addicts become creators, not to escape their past, but to give form to it. Their art, their writing, their dance is the same energy once used for destruction, now reclaimed for beauty. This is not therapy, it is alchemy. For libido must flow. If it is damned, it festers. If it is ignored, it rebels. But if it is seen, honored, given form, it becomes life. The addict does not need less desire. He needs truer direction. His craving is sacred energy misdirected, a prayer distorted. What do you hunger for? This is the question. Not what you consume, but what you lack, what you forgot, what was stolen, what you fear to feel. The answer is not in control, but in contact with yourself, with others, with the lost sacred. In the center of the famine lies the seed. The hunger you condemn is the same force that, once aligned, will carry you home. The self does not ask for starvation, it asks for recognition. What you seek is not gone, it is waiting. Let us go deeper now. Let us listen to the dreams. Part 4, Dreams and the Addicted Psyche, 1,500 plus words. The addict dreams even when he does not remember. For the unconscious does not sleep, it compensates. Where the conscious life becomes rigid, empty, or possessed, the dream erupts to restore balance. The psyche abhors flatness. It desires depth, and dreams are the voice of that desire. When the waking ego is caught in repetition, the dream speaks in paradox. A man addicted to control dreams he cannot hold a melting clock. A woman who numbs her feelings dreams of drowning in a sea of letters. These are not random images. They are sacred messages. In the realm of the addicted, dreams often repeat, not arbitrarily, but because the psyche is attempting to be heard. The compulsion is already a failed dream. The dream is the soul's next attempt. It is a rehearsal of what must be seen, suffered, and transformed. A man once came to me, lost in addiction. His waking life was a blur of consumption and shame, but his dreams were precise. In one, he filled an earthen jar with water, but each time the water leaked from a hidden crack, he worked faster, more urgently, until he collapsed, exhausted. This was no meaningless dream, it was the perfect symbol. He was trying to repair his outer life, status, appearance, control, while ignoring the crack, the inner wound, the early rupture. No matter how much he poured in, it would never hold. The dream did not punish him, it revealed him. Another patient, trapped in the chaos of substance abuse, dreamed of a house filled with smoke. He ran from room to room, opening windows, but the smoke returned, always, thick, choking. He awoke panicked. Was his soul trying to warn him? Perhaps, but there was more. The house is the image of the psyche, the smoke, not fire, but suffocation, not combustion, but purification. The dream was saying, you cannot escape what must be faced. You must stop running and breathe it in, not to die, but to be cleansed. The dream is not moral. It does not judge the addict. It reflects him, not as others see him, but as the deeper self knows him. The dream is intimate, archetypal, unrelenting. It does not flatter, it reveals. And revelation, when endured, becomes rebirth. In analysis, I have often asked, what was your dream last night? The answer is rarely simple, but if it is remembered, if it is honored, it becomes the key. The key not to control, but to meaning. And meaning is the one thing addiction cannot imitate. The dream is the reversal of the addiction. Where the addiction is acted unconsciously, the dream is received consciously. Where the addiction seduces into forgetfulness, the dream insists on memory. Memory of what was lost, what was loved, what was broken, and what still calls to be healed. One technique I often used is active imagination. In this practice, we do not analyze the symbol, we speak with it. We allow it to speak with us. And in addiction, this becomes sacred work. We sit silently and ask, what does the drink want to say? What does the screen demand? What God have I served unknowingly? In one such session, a man addicted to opioids visualized the pills as small white stones. He imagined one speaking. It said, I make you forget. He asked, forget what? It replied, that you were never held. He wept not from insight, but from remembrance. This is the purpose of the dream and its cousin, imagination. Not to solve, but to restore, to remember. The inner child, the lost father, the abandoned temple, the silenced God. Addiction forgets. Dreaming remembers. But dreaming is not always gentle. The psyche, like nature, is both creator and destroyer. And so the dream may appear as nightmare, repetition, panic, death. But these are not threats. They are initiations. The house crumbling, the ocean rising, the body failing. All are symbols of the ego's collapse before something greater. The dream does not ask us to interpret, it asks us to feel, to sit in the image, to breathe in the smoke, to walk the labyrinth, to face the figure in the mirror. Then, slowly, meaning arises, not as answer, but as presence. To truly engage the dream is to step out of addiction's trance. The addict moves in circles. The dream speaks in spirals. The circle repeats. The spiral transforms. In the spiral, we descend, but we do not return the same. There is an old dream reported by many. Walking down a staircase, deeper and deeper, until a door appears. Behind the door, darkness, or a figure, or a voice. This is the descent to the self. The very journey the addiction imitates but never completes. Why do so few addicts dream of light? Because they are already in pursuit of false light. The dream must reverse the illusion. It must show the dark, not as evil, but as womb, not as prison, but as temple. Only when the light is forgotten can the true flame be rekindled. And in that darkness, one may meet not terror, but truth, the mother who was never there, the father who could not protect, the God who vanished. The dream brings them not to torment, but to integrate, to hold at last what was never held. Sometimes the dream is simple. A locked door, a weeping child, a dry river. These are not puzzles, they are calls. The child is not a metaphor, it is your feeling function. The river is not a symbol, it is your libido. The door is not a test, it is a threshold. In one dream, a woman addicted to relationships saw herself carrying a corpse through a desert. She could not put it down. She said, "This is my need to be loved." And it was true, but more deeply, it was her need to carry her dead self, the part that had never been allowed to live. When she finally buried the corpse in the dream, flowers grew. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in years. The psyche had spoken, not in words, in ritual, in symbol, in love. This is the healing, not to reject the craving, but to dream with it, to see what it truly wants, to listen beneath the scream. The soul does not crave intoxication. It craves contact with itself. So I say to you now, remember your dreams, write them, draw them, speak them. They are your soul's resistance to forgetting. They are your map, and they are honest in a way your conscious mind may never be. The dream is not entertainment, it is revelation. And in addiction, it becomes the most faithful companion. For when the body collapses, when the world turns away, the dream remains. It will not leave you. It is your inheritance, your guide. Let us now move deeper still into the darkness that transforms. Part 5, the alchemy of despair, nigredo and breakdown. There comes a moment in the life of the addict when nothing works. The thrill fades, the numbing fails, the chase becomes unbearable. What was once a source of relief becomes a source of torment. The rituals continue, but the god no longer answers. This is nigredo, the soul's nightfall, the stage in which the ego is no longer able to maintain its illusions. The light dims not as punishment, but as precondition. The descent is not failure, it is transformation. But only if one is willing to remain in the dark long enough to see what lies there. In the alchemical text, nigredo is described as rotting, decomposition, putrefaction. But these were never meant to be taken literally. They are images of ego disintegration, the breakdown of the false self, the beginning of an inner death through which life may finally speak. Addiction mimics this death, but aborts it. It hovers just above the necessary suffering. The addict is on the threshold, but turns back again and again to the known pain, the pain of repetition. But true suffering begins when one says with no hope of escape, "I cannot do this anymore." This sentence, spoken from the soul and not the ego, is sacred. It is the sign that the descent has begun, not as collapse, but as initiation. For nigredo is not depression, it is confrontation. It is the unmasking of the lie that the ego can fix itself, that there is a solution outside of surrender. A woman came to me, addicted not to a substance, but to a man, a relationship that consumed her, betrayed her, revived her, and shattered her again. She could not leave, she could not breathe, and yet she called it love. But in her dreams, wolves tore her limb from limb. Again and again, she feared these dreams, thought they were punishment. But I told her, the wolves are not your enemies, they are your initiators. They are tearing apart the false identity you have confused for your soul. They are Saturn's animals, the devourers of illusion. In time, her dreams changed. She saw herself gathering her bones, washing them in a stream, singing to them. This was the symbolic reversal. The nigredo had done its work. The death of the mask gave birth to the true self, fragile, yes, but real. Despair, then, is not the enemy, it is the door, but only if entered consciously. The addict, in his compulsion, avoids despair. He skirts the edge, but never falls in. And so he repeats. He must descend, not into addiction, but into the sorrow the addiction conceals. There is a difference between collapse and descent. Collapse is unconscious, accidental. Descent is sacred, chosen, willed in the way. Only the soul can will it. When the addict chooses to feel, to stay, to weep, to break, that is descent, that is nigredo, that is the beginning of transformation. Saturn, the alchemical ruler of nigredo, is not kind. He is cold, slow, inevitable, but he is just. He brings time, limits, reality. He devours what is no longer true. The addict resists him. But in surrender, Saturn becomes the father the soul never had, the one who does not lie. Surrender is not defeat, it is initiation. It is the recognition that the ego has exhausted itself and that something deeper must now lead. The addict who surrenders is not weak, he is courageous, for he dares to stop running, to feel what the substance masked, to see what the ritual denied. True suffering, I have said, is the beginning of healing. Not suffering for its own sake, but suffering as contact, as presence, as being with what one has always fled. Grief, emptiness, meaninglessness. These are not punishments, they are doorways. The dark night of the soul is not romantic, it is raw, unadorned. There are no shortcuts. One wakes at 3 a.m. with no answers. One walks through days without light, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. Not relief, but depth. Not joy, but truth. In Nigredo, one meets the orphaned parts of the self, the child who was never held, the artist who was never allowed, the God who was never invoked. They do not scream, they wait. And in the silence of despair, their voices grow louder. The danger of addiction is not just destruction, it is distraction. It prevents the descent. It keeps the soul hovering in the hallway of healing, but never crossing the threshold. It mimics transformation, but delivers only repetition. But when the addict breaks, not from overdose or disgrace, but from the unbearable weight of untruth, then the real work begins. Then the rot becomes soil. Then the blackness becomes fertility. The psyche begins to compost its illusions. The old self dies, slowly, painfully. Rituals are dismantled, identities unravel, the body trembles, the dreams rage. But this is not madness, it is reordering. The self is not punishing, it is reclaiming. What was borrowed from the ego must now be returned. In this stage, the addict often feels he is losing everything. But what is being lost is not real. It is persona, pretense, pattern. What remains is essence, not yet formed, but present. A seed beneath the ash. I have often said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Nigredo is this making, this confrontation, the courage to sit with the formless, to be clay before the new form appears. To the one suffering addiction, I say this: your despair is sacred. Do not rush to fix it. Do not flee to the next distraction. Stay, feel. Let the old gods die. Let the silence speak. You are not breaking down, you are breaking open. And when the fire passes, what remains is true. A life that is not based on escape, but on encounter. A self that is not assembled from fragments, but revealed through fire. We now approach the turning. Part 6, withdrawal of the false god, the return of the self. Every addiction is a religion. The addict is not simply a consumer, he is a priest. The ritual is performed daily, the offering laid on the altar. The body is bowed, the time sacrificed, the will surrendered. But the god is false, not because it is unpowerful, but because it cannot redeem. Addiction imitates sacred structure. It has rites, repetitions, ecstasies, withdrawals, but the center is missing. There is no true presence, only a loop, a hollow temple. The addict knows this, even if unconsciously. He senses the betrayal, but cannot stop kneeling. To withdraw from addiction is not merely to quit a habit. It is to withdraw one's devotion from the unworthy object. It is to say, I will no longer offer my life to this altar. I will no longer worship what cannot bless me. But this declaration must not come from the ego. It must arise from the soul. The ego cannot unseat the God it once enthroned. It was not rationality that made the addiction powerful. It was archetypal longing. And archetypal forces do not respond to logic. They respond to meaning, to image, to sacrifice, to encounter with the numinous. In the depths of compulsion lies this forgotten yearning to belong to something greater. The addict does not crave death. He craves transcendence. But without inner access to the sacred, he reaches for its mimic, the drug, the thrill, the trance. These are counterfeit sacraments. There was once a man addicted to adrenaline. He raced motorcycles, sought danger, pushed boundaries. People called him reckless. But in dreams, he wandered a vast desert, alone, and at the center, a stone monastery. Inside, a monk in silence. No thrill, no risk, just stillness. This was his self, not his ego, not his hero image, but his self. The desert was the stripping away. The monk, the inner witness. He was not meant to chase death. He was meant to meet eternity. But the sacred instinct had been hijacked. The withdrawal from addiction begins not with abstaining, but with re-seeing. What is this substance, this pattern, this image I cannot live without? What do I believe it gives me? Not in words, but in symbols. What God have I asked it to be? To withdraw is to reclaim, not just power, but meaning. It is to recognize. I was never addicted to the thing. I was addicted to the illusion it carried. I was addicted to the hope, the memory, the promise of wholeness. But wholeness was never in the object. It was in the self waiting. The ego, when it begins this reversal, often panics. Who am I without this? It cries. What is left? And the answer is terrifying. Silence, stillness, emptiness. But this emptiness is not void, it is vessel. It is the chalice waiting to be filled with real presence. The old God, be it alcohol, control, pornography, work, chaos, must be named. Not to be cursed, but to be dethroned. One must see clearly, you are not my salvation. You were my surrogate. You held the place of something truer I had forgotten. In myth, the withdrawal of the god is often accompanied by death. Osiris dismembered, Dionysus torn apart, Christ crucified. These are not stories of punishment. They are symbols of transformation. The outer image dies, so the inner truth may be born. So too with the addict. When the object is removed, the soul trembles, identity shatters, emotions erupt. But this chaos is sacred. It is the self stirring beneath the ruins. It is the return of the God, not the false one, but the real. The turning point is not behavioral. It is symbolic. It is the moment when the substance loses its spell, when the bottle is no longer the chalice, when the phone is no longer the oracle, when the craving is no longer the prayer, then the soul begins to speak. This turning cannot be forced. It arises often in despair. The addict, lying broken, suddenly sees the image in reverse. He sees not salvation but slavery, not ecstasy but exile. And in that reversal, something breaks open. The spell is broken. Withdrawal is holy. Not because it is clean or calm, but because it is honest. It strips away illusion. It returns the gaze inward. It says, what I need is not out there. It says, the self I abandoned has not abandoned me. In many dreams of those withdrawing, we see images of shedding, a snake losing its skin, a mask being removed, clothes falling away. These are not symbols of loss. They are symbols of revelation. The old persona is dying. The original face begins to emerge. The self does not scream. It waits, it watches, it remains. It is not the addict's enemy. It is the presence he sought all along. And when he stops grasping, the self comes forward, not with thunder, but with breath. I have said that the self is the ordering principle of the psyche. It is not an idea. It is a living presence. It appears in dreams as center, guide, animal, circle, flame. It appears as that which cannot be possessed, but which reorients everything else. To return to the self is not to become pure, it is to become whole. The shadow remains, but integrated. The desire remains, but redirected. The longing remains, but now it points to something real. In this phase, the addict begins to see the world again, not through the lens of urgency, but of presence. He walks slower, feels more, dreams more. The body begins to re-inhabit itself. The soul, once buried beneath ritual, rises. But this return is not triumph, it is humility. It is the realization, I was never in control. And in that surrender, life begins. Not the old life, a new one, built not on reaction, but on relation, to self, to others, to meaning. The ritual changes. It no longer repeats compulsively. It becomes symbolic. Instead of the bottle, the journal. Instead of the screen, the dream. Instead of the fix, the breath. These are not substitutes, they are returns. What dies in withdrawal is not the addict, it is the mask, the God image that could not save, the myth that misled. And what is born is not the perfected self, but the authentic one, scarred, humbled, whole. Let us now approach the final movement, the place beyond escape, the sacred work of integration. Part 7, integration, living without escape. After the breakdown, after the symbolic death, after the withdrawal of the false God, what remains? Not a perfect self, not a healed self, a true self. And this self, unlike the persona, does not offer escape. It offers presence, it offers meaning. It demands relationship with suffering, with desire, with the world, and with what one has most deeply feared in oneself. To live without escape is not to live without longing. Longing remains. Craving does not vanish, but now it is heard, seen, honored. It is no longer blindly obeyed. It is held, transformed. This is the essence of integration, not suppression, but transformation through consciousness. In the depths of analysis, I witnessed this often. The patient who had come in search of a cure would begin to dream differently. Less of pursuit, more of encounter. Less of being chased, more of choosing to stand still. And in those dreams, a new symbol would appear, a child, a mountain, a path. These were signs that the self was no longer buried. It had begun to speak. Integration is not the absence of pain. It is the sacred inclusion of pain in the larger arc of meaning. One does not banish the shadow. One lives with it. One does not destroy the craving. One learns to bow to it, to ask it, what do you want me to know today? And one listens. There was once a man whose addiction nearly ended his life. When he finally stopped running, he found himself not in bliss, but in blankness. "Who am I now?" he asked. And the answer came slowly, not in words, but in gestures. He began to paint, not to impress, not to be productive, to feel. Each stroke of the brush was a prayer. His paintings were not pretty. They were raw, terrifying, sacred. They showed wolves, fire, empty rooms, crying children, and broken mirrors. But they were true. And through them, he found that what he once numbed, he could now express. His libido, once trapped in compulsion, had found form. This is individuation, not becoming someone better, but becoming who you truly are, no longer divided, no longer possessed, no longer living in exile from your own soul. And the path of individuation is never complete. The ego is not eliminated, it is aligned. The shadow is not erased, it is integrated. The addiction is not forgotten, it is remembered as a teacher, a wound, a symbol of what was once lost and has now been retrieved. To live without escape is to live symbolically, not to become a symbol, but to see life as symbol. To know that the wind may carry messages, that the stranger in the dream may be your own soul, that the ache in your chest may be a call to pray. Not in doctrine, but in presence. The dream now becomes guidance rather than protest. The images change. The flooding house becomes a flowing stream. The collapsing stairway becomes a forest path. The devouring animal becomes a guardian. This is the unconscious realigned with the self. It does not vanish. It deepens. Each day becomes a new initiation, not toward perfection, but toward participation in the mystery of life. The addict, now awakened, does not say, "I am healed." He says, "I am in relation." Relation to desire, to truth, to the invisible forces that once ruled him and now walk beside him. The libido must be directed. Without direction, it stagnates or repeats. With direction, it creates. The integrated soul writes, builds, mentors, sings, not to escape, but to offer, to give shape to the very forces that once threatened to consume him. There is a sacred archetype that arises now, the wounded healer. This figure is not whole because he has no wounds. He is whole because he no longer hides them. He speaks from the scar, not the mask. He helps not by advising, but by being. By embodying the truth that dissent is not failure, that longing is not sin, that suffering is not the end. The wounded healer does not preach. He listens, and through his presence, others feel seen, not as problems to be fixed, but as souls to be mirrored. This perhaps is the ultimate gift of the integrated addict, the capacity to reflect the truth in others because he has dared to face it in himself. To live without escape is not to reject pleasure. It is to savor it, not compulsively, but consciously. The first drink of tea, the first light of morning, the sound of wind through leaves. These are no longer background. They are sacrament. The sacred returns, not in thunder, but in stillness, not in visions, but in presence. The sacred returns when one no longer needs to flee oneself, when one can sit quietly with the ghost that once haunted and offer it bread and say, "You are part of me, you may stay." And the mountain comes. The final image, a figure walking slowly, alone, but not lost, no longer seeking to consume or perform or run. He walks not to reach a goal, but to be in movement with the self. He pauses often, breathes. He feels the weight of the past, but does not collapse. He carries it like a relic, painful, but sacred. This is not metaphor. This is life, your life. You are this figure. The path beneath you is your psyche. The mountain is the self. It does not demand conquest. It asks for reverence. You do not need to be pure. You need to be real. You do not need to have no cravings. You need to know what they point to. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be whole. And wholeness means this: nothing in you is left behind. Not the addict, not the child, not the shadow. All are welcomed. All are integrated. All are part of the soul's return. The journey ends where it began, a man in a darkened room. But now the flame flickers, not on the table, but in his chest. He reaches for nothing. He breathes. He remembers. And he begins again. Thus ends the descent. Thus begins the return.